to the channel. So we have match day coming up next week, which is when we pick all of our third year clinical rotation sites, and I haven't even made a dent in making my list, and instead of doing that, I decided to record this video instead. If I'm good at anything, it's procrastination. The Physical Therapy Centralized Application Service, or Ptcas, as most people will probably call it, put out its application. So Ptcas is, like the name says, a centralized application service. The name says centralized application service, where you're going to fill out your physical therapy school applications and then send them off to various schools. Note that there is a section for supplemental essays, and so you'll do the big Ptcas application where you're putting in your demographics and your grades and your extracurriculars, your shadowing hours, the big personal statement, which is what I want to talk about today. But then also there's school specific questions, so just be mindful of those and don't forget that you have to complete those as well. So I'm here today to talk about the probably biggest stressor for a lot of people when it comes to not even just PT school but just grad school applications in general, and that's the personal statement. I don't know what Ptcas calls it. It might be personal essay. Yeah, I don't know. Let's look it up. To get there, you go to ptcas.org/home.aspx. Oh, I don't remember my username and password. Got it. Okay. Oh, my voice. It looks like there's 4 sections to Ptcas. There's personal information, academic history, supporting information, and program materials. So it's literally just called the essay. If you've either looked into Ptcas before, or you've applied to physical therapy schools before, or you've been following my blog, you know that Ptcas actually has a prompt for its personal essay or personal statement every year, whereas, I think for some other programs, and even PT schools that don't use Ptcas, a lot of times their personal statement will literally just be why do you want to be a physical therapist, or tell us what made you want to become a physical therapist. But Ptcas has a specific prompt every year. So I think last year when I applied, it was explain how you are planning to demonstrate professionalism as a physical therapy student. But this year they've changed it up. So I had a whole blog post about the prompt that I applied with, but then I had to write a new one this year. The prompt this year is describe a meaningful experience in your life. Reflect on how that experience influenced your personal growth, such as your attitudes or perceptions. Super broad and kind of vague prompt, but that's good. That means that you can kind of talk about anything and spin it to match why you want to go into physical therapy, especially if you're someone like me who kind of started on your personal statement early and started jotting things down that you might want to say. I even will write down words or phrases that I really like and find a way to work those into my essay. Don't worry if you already started writing it and it's not matching the prompt. You can always spin it and kind of mold it to the prompt, and if you haven't started writing yet, then that's fine too. Now you know what you're supposed to write about. I have a few tips for you guys in terms of how to tackle this prompt specifically, and also just how to write your essay in general. My first tip for writing your personal statement is to follow the prompt. I cannot stress this one enough. I've seen so many essays that are fantastic. They're well written. They really convince me that the person wants to be either a physical therapist or a medical doctor or nurse or whatever they're applying to, but it doesn't follow the prompt. And I'm not affiliated with any admissions committees. I can't truly say that you'll get dinged for that, and I can't say that following the prompt will give you a better chance than someone who doesn't, but it probably will. It's so important to write about what they want you to write about. Now, you don't have to do it in a very specific way. There's no, set guidelines or outline that you have to follow, but it is so important to follow the prompt and write about a meaningful experience. And that can be anything. That doesn't have to be physical therapy related. That doesn't have to be something that happened to you in the clinic. It doesn't have to be about those typical topics that come up like family or mental health even these days. Write about whatever's true to you, write about whatever you're passionate about, whatever is genuine, and whatever you think, will give you the best shot of getting in. So stay true to yourself, but stay true to the prompt as well. My second tip kind of goes along with the first, and it's be cliche if it's true to you. A lot of times I've heard people say if you were an athlete and then you got injured and then you had to go to physical therapy and that made you want to become a PT, scratch that and don't write about it, because everyone writes about that. And my thing is, if everyone is writing about it, but it really is why everyone wants to become a PT, then everyone should be writing about it, right? No 2 essays about being an athlete and getting injured and going to PT are going to be the same anyway. So if it's your experience and it's why you wanted to become a PT, and you just saw PTs practice in this way that was like super compassionate and just really paying attention to like whole body health, and that's what made you want to go into the field, and that's what you should write about. Don't write about, for example, I talk about mental health all the time, so don't feel like you have to write about mental health because it's unique and gonna make you stand out if you don't actually have the experience or the passion or the drive to go into PT for mental health. It's pretty self-explanatory, I feel like, but I know that a lot of times people try to avoid the cliches, and yes, like in your writing, maybe avoid the cliches. Maybe don't start off the essay with, I want to be a physical therapist because this experience was meaningful and I'm passionate, etc. Because, yes, you can edit those out. But if something cliche happened to you and that's why you want to be a PT, then you do you. My third tip, I'd love to go on a trip right now. My third tip for writing your personal statement for Ptcas, I already forgot it, is to choose only one experience. I think that's such a broad and vague, maybe it's not too vague, maybe a broad prompt like that can be really enticing, and then you may want to write about everything that's meaningful that's ever happened to you, and you just want to like list out all these reasons that you want to be a PT or whatever field you're going into. But I think that it'll give you a much more cohesive, streamlined, thoughtful, genuine, detailed essay if you pick one meaningful experience. And so my advice would be to introduce that experience in your introduction. The best way to do that is through a story, so maybe starting off with like setting the scene of what happened when that meaningful experience was happening, how you were feeling, maybe what you were visualizing, and kind of going for like the senses, like what did you smell and what did you hear, rather than just saying my most meaningful experience was, but then show how that changed your attitudes and perceptions. But stick to that one meaningful experience. And maybe off of that one meaningful experience, you got a sense of how to be more compassionate towards patients. And maybe that one meaningful experience made you a more active person. Whatever that experience did for you, I would encourage you to write about it. If you feel like it fits, you know, if you feel like you have room for it and you can talk about it in enough detail without overdoing it. I think my camera's trying to tell me I'm running out of battery, but I just charged it. I'm gonna ignore it. Okay, my fourth tip for writing your personal statement for Ptcas is show, don't explain. I think that all of my tips have kind of been running together as I talk about them, but this one in particular is about, rather than just explaining like, here's what happened and it made me a compassionate person, explain like how did it make you a more compassionate person, like what have you done since then to fuel that compassion, to fuel that sort of like already that like physical therapist that's budding inside of you. A few ways that you can show and not explain are to include a story, like I said before, and not just explaining the story but telling the story. It's okay to start with something that's more humorous or, you know, serious. You don't have to be super formal in these personal statements. I mean, don't use like acronyms that are like texting acronyms or throwing in like LOL or haha. Like that's not really appropriate. But for example, you could start with a cliffhanger and then bring it full circle in your introduction, or you could make the reader wait until the very end of your essay to truly bring it home, and that way it keeps them engaged the entire time. So those were my 4 main tips for writing your personal statement for Ptcas. There are a few other things that I wanted to mention just to be aware of. Be aware of the differences between undergrad and graduate programs. Note that now you're entering a more career-focused program, whereas undergrad kind of sets you up to then get to this point. You want to show not only your character and how your perceptions and attitudes have changed for the better, preferably, but how are you then going to use that in your career, in your relationships with others, be that with family, with patients, with friends, with colleagues, or your bosses. It can be really helpful to reflect on your experiences as a volunteer or a shadow or a tech. Like I said, you don't have to necessarily talk about a meaningful experience that took place in the clinic, but if something did happen in the clinic or the hospital that you feel like really could help you in this personal statement, then go for it. Those types of things can end up being cliche too, but like I said, that's not a problem as long as it's true to you and it's genuine. I know that last year when I wrote my blog post about writing a personal statement, I spoke a lot about having a theme. I think that this prompt with the meaningful experience, that kind of becomes the theme in itself, and that's also why I encourage choosing just one meaningful experience rather than just trying to explain kind of everything that you've been up to. My last sort of unofficial you'll know is to just try to see physical therapy in everything. Physical therapists treat people, not the ailments. It's just so important to recognize that we're forming relationships with people and helping to better their lives, and that you can do every day, and you can know every day. Do your best to try to see, you know, how physical therapy fits in. How accessible are the buildings that you're going into every day? Are you taking the time to really hear someone when they're speaking and listening to kind of deeper meanings behind what they might be saying? Think about how these things are going to impact your career and the relationships that you do go on to form with your patients. Once you kind of get that ball rolling on seeing physical therapy and everything, you notice that it's truly everywhere. Alright guys, I have ranted long enough. Those are my 4 plus some tips about writing your personal statement for Ptcas. A reminder that I am available for essay editing. To get more information on that, just go to www. I knew I was gonna mess that up. If you'd like my help on essay editing, go to www.thedptdiaries.com and click on editing, and all of my editing services are available there. There's FAQs, there's pricing, all of it is there for you, and I have a totally new blog look. The blog got a makeover and I'm so excited, so even if you don't want help writing your essay, please go check it out. I'm very excited, I'm very proud of it, and I'm really excited to transfer all of my blog posts over from the old one. So when you go on there, you might notice not all of them are there yet, but they will be. Please give this video a like if it helped you out. Leave a comment down below about where you're applying to and, you know, what you're looking forward to in your application. I know this can be a stressful time, but have fun with it. Do your best to, you know, kind of just channel yourself throughout the entire application. And I know that the schools you apply to are going to love you and you're going to do great. And I will see you guys very soon. Hopefully it doesn't take me this long to make another video, but until then, happy writing. Bye. I love this. I love filming like this because you can only see this and it makes my life look so put together even if my words aren't. But I've got this like huge pile of clothes on my bed. I love social media. Everything is fake. Everything's fake, guys. Okay, have a great day.